Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. What I wanted to do was I wanted to get on here and just talk for a brief moment about a milestone. I happened to look at the calendar the other day and I realized that this podcast is 5 years old. Yeah. Surprise, surprise, surprise. I had no idea that the podcast had turned 5 years old. I didn't come into this podcast, necessarily wanting to be around this long, but it's been a lot of fun. And I just wanted to get on here and just drop a couple of gems and get out of here. I think for me, this podcast has just been it's been a lot of fun and it's been a labor of love. It's not something that I feel like it to me, it just happens organically. It's not anything forced. I know when I record, whether I record by myself or if I record someone else, I try to make sure that it's authentic as me and that I'm giving people, authentically me and just, some raw shit. And like, I don't really, I've said this time and time before, I don't worry about numbers or anything like that because I think ultimately if you put out dope stuff, dope people will listen. But I'd be lying if I told you that I thought I'd be doing this for 5 years because prior to this podcast, I had an internet radio show that was 5 years. So I've been in this space, for 10 years, which is amazing in and of itself because, again, it's not something that I set out to do. That being said, a lot of times people always ask, like, what's my thought process or anything like that. Like, I don't pay attention to numbers. I don't worry about, if such and such doesn't retweet my tweet or whatever like that. The people who need to listen will listen. And I also understand too that not every person will listen to your podcast. Sometimes the people closest to you won't even listen to your podcast, and that's cool. It's a little weird that, people that you've never met will listen. And sometimes, people that, your best friends or whomever won't listen. But, again, everybody, I look at it like this. Everybody doesn't have the time nor the capacity to listen to podcasts. I can, because I work from home. I work independently. I'm not on a phone or anything like that. So I have all day. And even before I work from home, when I was going into an office, my commute was an hour. So I could listen to a lot of podcasts and at work I was, independent. So it was cool. But the one thing I will tell, fellow creators is I don't operate by any rules necessarily, but the things that I do want to kind of pass along is a lot of times people get in it for, different reasons. Some people get into podcasting really to, let it be something where it can supplement their income or become their primary form of income. I didn't get into it for that. So I don't, it doesn't bother me if, 1,000 people listen and 1 week and 100 people listen the next week. I have no control over that. The only thing I can do is be consistent about what it is I'm saying and what it is I'm doing. The one thing I will say is that I operate under the the W's, as my second grade teacher used to tell me. Operate under the W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Right? So who are you? I think that's very simple, but very apropos. You have to tell people who you are and let them know what you're about in your podcast. That way people realize if they want to listen or not. What are you going to talk about? That's very important. For me, you've been listening to this podcast. I don't talk about current events. I made that decision a long time ago because it just didn't fit me. Now, I'll talk about current events all day long with you on, text message or group chat or Twitter or whatever the case may be. But for people, who want to listen to this podcast, if you want to just pick a random podcast from 3 years ago, it's not dated. I think if I talk about current events, it's dated. So unless you're in a particular time, you may or may not be able to relate. So that's just why I do it. It's not feasible for me to do it. But, what are you going to talk about? I think that's very important. If you don't know what you're going to talk about, then, you can't really expect an audience because people have to know what it is that you're talking about because they have to make the decision whether or not they want to continue to listen and support week in and week out. Where is the third W? Where are you going to launch this from? A lot of times people have different ideas as far as platforms where they want to do it. They may do it from their website. They may use sites like Anchor or SoundCloud. Where do you want to launch it from? That's very important because, you want to reach some audience. You definitely want to reach somebody. But initially, I know, when you start podcasting, you can launch and not necessarily know who you're actually reaching. So where you launch it from does actually matter. The fourth W, when do you want to drop your podcast? I made the conscious decision, and I started this early. At one time, I think when I first started, I was dropping the podcast on Fridays, and then I moved it to Saturdays, and then those days just didn't work for me. Just the way my schedule was, and things I did around the house and stuff like that. It was more convenient for me to drop the podcast every Thursday. So I made this conscious decision to put the podcast out every Thursday, dropping at midnight. And so that's what it is. And so if I have to record early, sometimes I'll record podcasts 2 or 3 weeks in advance or a month in advance. It just depends. And it depends on if I have a guest or not based on their schedule. But you're going to get a podcast with the exception of my birthday week. You're going to get a podcast every Thursday, no matter what. So when the drop is very important because people like consistency. And if you're inconsistent with your releases, they're going to be your listeners will be inconsistent with how, they listen because they don't know, unless they're subscribing and getting all of your information and everything like that. And the last W, why? Why do you want to do it? I think that's a fair question to ask. Why do you have a podcast? What makes your podcast any different? Why do you want to do this? And that's a question that I think we all have to ask because honestly, if you're doing a podcast and 2 people are listening, some people, not everybody, but some people might be like, well, you know what? It's not worth me spending 30 minutes to an hour each week to deliver a podcast and promote it and market it and all this good stuff like that. And 2 people are listening. But again, it goes back to why do you want to do it? So that's a question that you have to ask and what, will actually satisfy you. But we all ask that question. Why am I doing this? Like the podcast doesn't, I earn a salary, right? At my job. So, and it pays the bills. So it's not like, if I stop podcasting, I'm going to, be out on the streets. So, you have to ask yourself why. But, once you answer those 4, those 5 W's, I think everything else kind of falls into place. But for me, like I said, this has been dope, man. I really appreciate all of the support. I appreciate everybody listening. I will check the numbers from time to time, and I'm always amazed at, people who are listening in China or New Zealand. I don't know anybody in China. I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody in New Zealand. I do know a couple people in the UK, and I appreciate that, the love over there. But, outside of the United States, I mean, it's mind-boggling that someone would sit down and listen to me talk for 30 minutes about whatever. But I appreciate it. And, the most I can say is that, at least for another year, you'll be getting, more podcasts from me. And it's something that I enjoy doing, and it's not something that interrupts my family life. I'm married. We have 4 kids, and I have a career outside of this. So it's not like it's something that's in the way. If it ever got to the point where it was in the way, then I've definitely stopped doing it. But, for now, I can tell you that you'll get at least another year, because that's what I'm signing up for. But nonetheless, I wanted to get on here and just, like I said, thanks everybody who listens, who retweets and posts and all of that good stuff. Too many people to name. I want to thank everybody who contributes to the podcast, because for the most part, anytime I ask someone to be on, they're always on. So shout out to all of y'all. I'm going to make a few changes for, next year, but they'll be subtle. But this was a good year as far as this podcast was concerned. It was an awful year, but as far as this podcast was concerned, I'm very happy with the content that was created and the people that I did it with. And more importantly, I'm thankful for you, the listener, for tuning in, because I definitely appreciate the love and support. And, especially to my fellow podcasters, I always try to, return the love as well, because I think that's very important. But yeah, that's me. That's just a couple of things I had on my chest. So that's going to do it for me. Again, thanks for 5 years. I'll catch you guys in year number 6. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle. This is the 12 Kyle podcast. And I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.